I am Gerald Mitchum, 67 years old, retired teacher, widower, father of one son. And on that cold Thursday in November, at the age of 67, sitting at a dinner table inside a cabin worth over $774,000. A cabin I bought, a cabin I maintained, a cabin I had offered to share with my son and his family out of pure love. My son looked at me across the turkey and the cranberry sauce and the warm candlelight, and he said words that I will never forget for as long as I live. He said, "Dad, you're retired. What's the point of you anymore?" And his wife, my daughter-in-law, Sandra, she did not stop him. She did not look shocked. She did not put down her fork and say, "Derek, that is a terrible thing to say." She laughed. A small laugh, quiet, like she was watching a joke land, and I sat there. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw my napkin down and leave the table. I just picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and looked out the window at Lake Tahoe. The water was still that evening, dark and glassy, mountains reflected on the surface like a painting. I thought to myself, "Gerald, remember this moment, because everything is about to change," and it did. Let me tell you about my life, so you understand what that moment truly meant. I grew up poor, not the kind of poor where things were tight, the kind of poor where my mother cut one sandwich into 4 pieces and called it dinner. My father worked in a factory for 31 years and died of a heart attack at 59. He never owned a house, he never took a vacation, he worked and he struggled and he loved us as best he could. I swore I would do better. I became a teacher, high school history. For 38 years, I stood in front of classrooms and I taught young people about the world, about sacrifice, about courage, about what happens to societies that forget their elders, that throw away wisdom like old newspaper. I loved teaching. I still do. My students, hundreds of them over the decades. Some of them still write to me. Some of them send me letters on their wedding days, on the days their children are born. One of my former students became a senator. She still calls me Mr. Mitchum. And then there was my wife, Eleanor. Eleanor was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. Not just in face, in spirit. She had this way of walking into a room and making every person in it feel important. She used to say, "Gerald, kindness is free. There is no reason not to spend it generously." We were married for 41 years. We had one son, Derek. We poured everything into that boy. I tutored students in the evenings for extra money so Derek could go to soccer camp. Eleanor sewed his Halloween costumes by hand because we could not afford the store. Bought ones. We skipped vacations. We drove old cars. We packed lunches instead of eating out. When Derek was accepted to university, I cried in the parking lot of the school because I did not want him to see me. After Eleanor passed 4 years ago, breast cancer, she was so brave. She never once complained. I was alone in a big house in Sacramento. Derek was in San Francisco by then, married to Sandra. They had a daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who was 4 years old. I did not want to be a burden, but I missed them. I missed having family around. So when I decided to sell the Sacramento house and buy something smaller, Derek came to me with an idea. He said, "Dad, why don't you buy a cabin at Lake Tahoe? Sandra and I can bring Lily up on weekends. You won't be alone." I thought it was a wonderful idea. I bought the cabin, $774,000, everything Eleanor and I had saved, everything from the sale of the Sacramento house, every penny I had carefully set aside over 38 years of teaching. I bought it and I put it in my name, and I told Derek, "This is for all of us. This is our family place." For 2 years, they came up on weekends. I cooked, I cleaned, I paid the property taxes, I paid for the groceries when they visited, I fixed the dock after the winter storms. I repainted the front porch. Derek and Sandra relaxed. They hiked. They took the kayaks out on the lake. They sat on the porch with glasses of wine while I watched Lily, and made her scrambled eggs in the morning. I did not mind. I was happy to do it. I thought this was what family looked like. I did not realize, until that Thanksgiving, that they had stopped seeing me as a person. They had started seeing me as a service. It started like any other holiday visit. Derek and Sandra arrived on Wednesday evening with Lily, who had just turned 6. She ran to me at the door, arms wide, yelling, "Grandpa Gerald, Grandpa Gerald, that little girl. She is the reason I kept smiling through so many hard days." I had spent 2 days preparing. Turkey, of course, mashed potatoes with real butter, the way Elena used to make them, glazed carrots, 2 kinds of pie, fresh bread. I had cleaned the entire cabin top to bottom. I had put fresh flowers on the table. Sandra walked in, looked around, and said, "Did you vacuum the rugs? They still look a little dull." "No, hello." "No, thank you, just the rugs," I said. "I can run the vacuum again if you like." She waved her hand. "Don't bother. It's fine." That evening, Sandra's parents called her on video. Her mother, a loud, cheerful woman named Beverly, appeared on the screen, and Sandra carried the phone around the cabin showing her mother the view, the kitchen, the fireplace, the dock. Beverly said, "Oh, Sandra, this place is gorgeous. You and Derek have such good taste." Sandra did not correct her. She just smiled and said, "We love it up here." I was standing 5 feet away, washing dishes. I told myself, "Let it go, Gerald. It is not worth it." Thanksgiving morning, I was up at 5:30, turkey in the oven, coffee made. The lake was covered in low morning fog, and the trees were orange and gold, and it was one of the most beautiful mornings I had ever seen. Derek came downstairs at 9:30. He poured himself coffee, looked at his phone, and sat down at the kitchen table. He did not say good morning. He did not look at the turkey. He did not ask if I needed help. He just sat there scrolling. Sandra came down at 10. She looked at what I was cooking, made a small face, and said, "Derek, I told you we should have ordered from that catering place in Truckee. This is a lot of effort for just us." I kept stirring the pot, just us, as if I was not standing there, as if I was the stove itself. At noon, Sandra's brother Marcus arrived with his wife Tina. They were in their 40s, both successful, the kind of couple who drops their vacations. Marcus had just returned from a work conference in Milan. Tina had recently redecorated their Marin County home. They walked in, and Sandra gave them the full tour. The same tour she had given Beverly on the phone. Showing them everything, the view, the dock, the new kayaks I had bought at the end of summer. Marcus said, "This place must have cost a fortune. Good investment, Derek." Derek nodded. "Yeah, we got lucky with the timing." I was carrying a bowl of cranberry sauce to the table. I set it down carefully. I did not say a word. We dinner, that is when it happened. We were all seated. Lily was beside me, drawing a turkey on a piece of paper with crayons. The food was on the table, everything I had cooked for 2 days. The cabin was warm. The fire was going. Outside, the lake was turning silver in the late afternoon light. Marcus raised his glass and said, to Derek and Sandra, for keeping this place so well, "What a spot." Everyone clinked glasses. I held mine but did not drink. Then Marcus looked at me, genuinely curious, I think, not mean, just oblivious, and said, "So, Gerald, what do you do with yourself up here? Retired life treating you well?" Before I could answer, Derek set down his fork. He looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing something slightly inconvenient. And he said it, "Come on, Dad, you're retired. What's the point of you anymore? You had your run." The table went quiet for just a second. Sandra smiled into her wine glass. Marcus looked mildly uncomfortable, then looked away. Tina suddenly became very interested in her mashed potatoes. Lily looked up from her drawing, and I sat there, 67 years old, a man who had worked for 38 years, a man who had raised this boy, a man whose wife had just died 4 years ago, and who still cried sometimes at night because the bed was too quiet, a man who had spent 770 $4,000 on a cabin so that his son would have a place to bring his family. What's the point of you anymore? I took a slow sip of water. I looked out at the lake, and I made a decision. Here is what I never told Derek. Here is what I never told anyone, really, except Eleanor, and she took it to her grave like I asked her to. For the last 12 years of my teaching career, I had been writing, not for publication, not for money, just for myself. Every evening after school, after grading papers and making lesson plans, I would sit at my desk and I would write. I wrote a book. Actually, I wrote 3. The first was a memoir about growing up poor in rural Ohio. The second was a novel, historical fiction, set during the Second World War, based on letters my father had written home from the Pacific that I found in a shoebox after he died. The third book was different. It was about teaching, about the 38 years I spent in classrooms, about the students I remembered, about what education really means. I sent the manuscripts out, years ago, to a handful of small publishers. Nothing happened. I forgot about it mostly, wrote because I loved it, not because I expected anything. 3 months before that Thanksgiving, 3 months before my son asked me what the point of me was, I had received a letter. A publishing house in New York had found my second manuscript through a literary agent who had come across it at a small press competition I had entered years earlier and completely forgotten about. They wanted to publish the war novel, and they were not alone. A producer in Los Angeles had read it too. They wanted to talk about film rights. I had said nothing to Derek, nothing to anyone. I was still processing it myself. I am a humble man. I do not announce things. Eleanor always said I was too quiet about my own accomplishments. But that evening, after Thanksgiving dinner, after the dishes were done, and Marcus and Tina had driven back to their hotel, and Lily was asleep, and Derek and Sandra were watching something on television, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and I thought about Eleanor. I thought about what she would say. She would say, "Gerald Mitchum, stop being so patient with people who do not deserve your patience." She would say, "You spent 40 years giving. It is time to live." She would say, "Go." So I made some phone calls. I did not say anything to Derek, not on Thanksgiving night, not on Friday, not when they packed up on Sunday morning and drove back to San Francisco. Derek hugged me at the door the way he always did, the kind of hug that is really just 2 shoulders touching briefly. Sandra said, "Thanks, Gerald," and that was all. Lily held my face in her small hands and said, "Bye, Grandpa, I love you," and I held her for a long moment. Then they were gone, and I stood on the porch and watched the car disappear down the mountain road. And I went inside and I started making a list. I called a real estate agent on Monday. She told me the market in Tahoe was strong. I asked her how quickly we could move. She said, if we price it right, could be 60 days. I said, list it. I called my financial advisor. I told him I wanted to liquidate my investment accounts and move the funds to an account Derek had no knowledge of, no access to, no connection to. I called the publisher in New York. I said yes. I called my oldest friend, a man named Reuben, who had retired to a small town in Umbria, Italy, a place called Spoleto. He had been asking me to visit for 5 years. I said, "Reuben, I am not visiting. I am coming to stay, at least for a year, maybe longer." There was a pause on the line. Then Reuben said, "Gerald, it is about time." Over the next 60 days, I packed my life into boxes. Books, Eleanor's photographs, a few pieces of furniture that had sentimental value. I gave the rest away to neighbors, to charity, to a young family I found through a local church who had nothing. I mailed my important documents to Reuben for safekeeping. I bought a one-way ticket to Rome. And then I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where my son had asked me what the point of me was, and I wrote a letter. It took me 4 evenings to write it. When it was finished, I sealed it in an envelope, wrote Derek's name on the front, and left it on the kitchen counter next to the key to the cabin. Except, and this is the part Derek did not expect, the key I left was the only key, because the cabin no longer belonged to me. The sale had closed 2 days before I left. I locked the door for the last time on a cold December morning. The lake was frozen at the edges. The mountains were white with new snow. I stood on the porch for a while. I said out loud to no one and to Elinor, I lived a good life here, and now I'm going to live a great one. Then I drove to the airport. Spoleto is a medieval city in the hills of Umbria. It is the kind of place that feels like time forgot to rush. Stone streets, olive trees, small restaurants where the owner also cooks, church bells that ring on the hour, old men playing chess in the piazza in the afternoon. Reuben had found me a small apartment near the city center, 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, a balcony with a view of a Roman aqueduct. I sat on that balcony my first morning and drank Italian coffee and ate a cornetto from the bakery downstairs, and I felt, for the first time in years, like myself. Not a retired man, not a burden, not something without a point, just Gerald, a man with a good cup of coffee and a beautiful view and a whole new chapter ahead of him. I worked on my book revisions every morning. Afternoons, I walked. I went to the market. I learned Italian, badly at first, then slowly better. I made friends with the couple who ran the bakery, with an old widow named Maria who taught me to make fresh pasta, with Reuben's circle of retired professionals from all over Europe who gathered on Friday evenings to talk about everything: history, politics, art, food. I was not invisible. I was not furniture. I was a person with stories and knowledge and experience, and they wanted to hear all of it. The book was published in the spring. Letters from the Pacific, A Son's Story by Gerald Mitchum. It sold modestly at first, a few hundred copies in the first month. Good reviews, a profile in a regional magazine in upstate New York, a radio interview, and then, and I still cannot quite believe this, a popular book reviewer with millions of followers online discovered it and wrote about it, called it the most quietly powerful war novel I have read in 20 years. Within 3 weeks, it was on the bestseller list. By summer, it had sold over 200,000 copies. By the following fall, the film rights had been optioned for a number that made my old financial advisor call me twice to confirm I had heard him correctly. I was sitting on my balcony in Spoleto, watching the swallows circle the aqueduct, when my publisher called to tell me we were going into a 15th printing. I thought about my father, about his shoebox of letters, about the factory where he worked for 31 years. I thought about Elinor. I said, Dad, we did it. And I cried, but the good kind. I need to tell you about the letter now. Derek did not know about the sale of the cabin until he tried to book a weekend trip in mid-January, about 3 weeks after I had left, and the real estate website showed the property as sold. He called my phone. I let it ring. He called again. I sent a short text. I am well. Read the letter. He and Sandra drove up to Tahoe. They found the cabin locked with a combination they did not know. The new owners had already changed it. A neighbor told them she had seen movers come in December. Derek went back to San Francisco. He found the letter. I had sent him a copy by mail, to arrive exactly when I calculated he would be looking for answers. He called me when he had finished reading it. I answered this time. He did not say hello. He just said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, something between anger and something broken, he said, Dad, I didn't know. I said, I know you didn't. I want to tell you what was in that letter. Not all of it. Some of it was too personal, between a father and a son. But I want to tell you the important parts, because the letter was not angry. It was not a list of grievances. It was not a courtroom speech. It was just the truth. Dear Derek, by the time you read this, I will be somewhere you didn't expect. That is all right. I am safe. I am happy. I am more alive than I have been in years. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it, not as an attack, but as a gift. Because the truth, when you finally understand it, will be the most valuable thing I ever gave you. On Thanksgiving, you asked me what the point of me was. I thought about that question for a long time. And here is what I decided. The point of me is not something you get to measure. The point of me is not my income, or my title, or my productivity, or what I contribute to your schedule. The point of me is that I lived. I loved your mother for 41 years. I worked for 38. I raised you with everything I had. I bought that cabin not as an investment but as a promise that we would always have a place to be family. But family is not a place. I understand that now. Family is respect. Family is seeing a person, really seeing them, and knowing that their worth is not tied to what they can do for you today. Your mother used to say that the greatest sin is not cruelty. The greatest sin is indifference. Being cruel means you still feel something. Indifference means you have stopped seeing a person altogether. I felt invisible at that table, Derek. Not just that day, for a long time. I am not angry with you. Anger is just hurt wearing a costume. What I feel is sadness for the years we lost to busyness and misunderstanding, and hope that the years ahead can be different. There are some things you did not know about me. I wrote a book. Actually, I wrote 3. The second one is being published. You may have heard about it by now. If not, you will. Your grandfather's letters made it into the world. He worked in a factory for 31 years and never owned a home. But his words, his love, his fear, his longing for home are going to live longer than any of us. I think about that when people ask me what the point of a retired old man is. I liquidated everything. The cabin is sold. The accounts are closed. I am starting over, not because I am running away, but because I have been standing still for too long out of loyalty to a version of us that may not have been real. I have gone to Italy. When I come back, and I will come back, because you are my son and I love you and nothing changes that, I hope we can sit down and talk. Really talk, the way we used to before life got in the way. And Lily, please tell Lily that Grandpa Gerald is fine. Tell her I am learning Italian so I can teach her some words when I see her. Tell her that the olive trees here are very old and very wise, and they reminded me of her. I love you, Derek. I always have. I always will. That is the point of me. Dad Derek called me every day for 2 weeks. At first the calls were hard. He was defensive. He kept saying, I was just joking, Dad. You took it the wrong way. I listened. I did not argue, but I also did not pretend. I said, Derek, whether it was a joke or not, it landed like the truth. And sometimes we say the truest things when we think we're joking. He was quiet for a long time after that. Sandra called me once. It was a short call, awkward. She said she was sorry if things had felt unwelcoming. I thanked her for calling. I meant it. I did not burn bridges. I did not write her off. People are complicated. Sandra was raised in a family where worth was tied to achievement, where you were valued for what you produced. She had learned that language, and she had spoken it without thinking about who it might wound. That does not make it right, but it makes it human. Lily drew me a picture, and Derek took a photo of it and sent it to me. It showed a stick figure man, me, I assumed, with wild gray hair, standing next to what I think was meant to be a gondola, though it looked more like a shoe. Underneath she had written in wobbly crayon letters, Grandpa Italy, I miss you. I had it framed. It hangs on the wall of my apartment in Spoleto, above my desk where I write every morning. When the book hit the bestseller list, Derek called, and his voice was different this time, quieter, humble in a way I had not heard since he was a boy. He said, Dad, I read it. I said, what did you think? He said, I didn't know about Grandpa's letters. I didn't know any of it. He paused. I didn't know about you, not really. There was a long silence. Then he said, I'm sorry, Dad. I mean it. I am really sorry. I had been waiting not for those words exactly, but for that feeling behind them, that genuine reckoning, that moment when a person stops being defensive and becomes honest. I said, I know you are, son. I know. 11 months after I left for Italy, Derek, Sandra, and Lily flew to Rome. I drove down to meet them. It was a warm April morning, the kind of spring day that makes you believe the world is fundamentally generous. When I saw Lily run toward me across the arrival hall, pigtails flying, backpack bouncing, yelling, Grandpa, Grandpa, I did not care about anything else. Not the cabin, not the words at the dinner table, not any of it. I just dropped to my knees and held that little girl. We spent 10 days together. I showed them Spoleto, the aqueduct, the cathedral, the market on Saturday mornings. Maria taught Lily to roll pasta dough. Reuben took Derek fishing in a small reservoir up in the hills. One evening, Sandra and I were sitting on my balcony alone. Derek had taken Lily for gelato, and she said something I did not expect. She said, Gerald, I owe you an apology, a real one, not just the polite kind. What we did, how we treated you, I was a part of that too. I let things happen that I should have stopped. I looked at her. She was not comfortable saying it, but she said it anyway. I said, Sandra, I appreciate that more than you know. She said, how are you so calm about all of this? I thought about it. Then I said, because I am too old to spend energy on bitterness, and because I genuinely believe people can change when they're shown the truth. She nodded slowly. Then she said, Lily talks about you every single day. You know that, right? I smiled. That mattered more than any apology. I am 60, 8 years old now. I live in Spoleto, Italy. My second book has sold over 300,000 copies. My third book, the one about teaching, about 38 years of standing in front of classrooms, is being published next spring. I have more money now than I ever had when I was working, not because I chased it, because I finally stopped hiding who I was. I walk to the market every morning. I drink good coffee. I write. I call Lily every Sunday and we are learning Italian together. She is much better than me already, which delights me completely. Derek and I speak twice a week. It is not perfect. There are still awkward moments, still things left unsaid, still years of distance to cross. But we are crossing them, slowly, like crossing a river on stepping stones, one careful step at a time. I think about Elinor every day. I think about what she would say if she could see all of this. She would probably say, Gerald, I told you to go years ago. And then she would laugh. I am going to say something now that I hope you remember long after this video ends. We live in a world that worships busyness, that measures worth by productivity, by salary, by title, by what you are currently producing. And in that world, it is very easy, dangerously easy, to look at an old person, a quiet person, a retired person, and think, what is the point of you? But worth is not a job description. Worth is not a paycheck. Worth is not what you can do for someone else today. Worth is the sum of a life lived, the struggles, the love, the quiet mornings, the hands that worked, the hearts that were carried, the stories that were kept, the wisdom that was earned through years of showing up, of failing, of getting back up, of choosing kindness when the world chose cruelty. The people in your life who seem to have nothing left to offer, the old parents, the quiet grandparents, the humble ones who never brag, who sit at the edge of the room and watch. Those people are libraries, and when you dismiss them, you are burning books. You do not know what stories they are carrying. You do not know what they have survived. You do not know what they have given up for you, silently, without ever asking for thanks. Do not wait until someone sells the cabin and disappears to Italy to realize what they meant to you. Love them now, see them now, ask them questions now, because one day And this day always comes faster than you expect. You will sit at a table and realize the chair is empty. And you would give anything, anything to fill it again.